Blender 3.4 just released, and I wanted to go over the documentation and cover everything. Yes, everything. I'll be honest, while I'm really excited about Blender 3.4, I was not excited about reading through all this dry technical information. When you stare at bland documentation for countless hours on end, you start to go just a little bit crazy. But I'm a man of the people, so I hope you appreciate the efforts and enjoy the video. There's a new Story Pencil add-on that makes storyboarding much easier by improving the workflow for creating scenes, making changes, and improving your ability to rearrange elements on your timeline. Grease Pencil has been greatly improved with new options, shortcuts, and a new algorithm, and a new outline modifier that allows you to generate perimeter strokes based on the camera view. The new method uses the radius of circumference to determine how close the strokes are for filling. The previous method has now been renamed Extend. Use the mouse wheel or page up/down to adjust the length of the strokes, S key to toggle Extend method, and D key to toggle Extended Stroke Collision. The Line Art modifier now has a Forced Intersection option that allows you to override the No Intersection command at will. And last but not least, the Time Offset modifier now has a Chain mode. The new method for gap closure determines when to close the strokes based on how close they are using a circle radius. This new method is better suited than the old one when the extended strokes never cross. If the gap between strokes is greater than the actual radius, the system shows circles. To change the size of the circle, use the mouse wheel or page up/page down. Also, it's possible to use the middle mouse button. As soon as the radius determines that the gap is closed, the help circles are hidden. This allows the user to focus on pending gaps, keeping only circles in pending ones. The advanced panel was rearranged and now has a new section for gap closure with all new options. The old gap closure method using straight lines has been renamed as Extend, and the leak size has been removed because new algorithms make this parameter obsolete. The fill tool Extend lines are now clipped when there's a collision. There's a new option to check if extend lines collide with normal strokes. When enabled, if the extensions collide, the color will be blue. Only blue extensions will be used to limit the fill area. You can use the S key to toggle Extend method from Extend Radius Extend, and use the D key to toggle Stroke Collision Check. A new outline modifier is now available to generate perimeter strokes from the camera view. A new Forced Intersection option is available that allows objects to always produce intersections, even against objects that are set as no intersection. This allows more flexible configuration of more complex scenes. The new Chain mode mentioned earlier is located in the Time Offset modifier and allows you to run different offset types, one after the other in a chain. Let's move on to other improvements in Grease Pencil. Now SVG Import allows importing several files in one operation. Also, the name of the .svg is used as the Blender name. The new outline operator is used to convert strokes to perimeter. The new outline option at brush level allows you to use the last stroke drawn to convert to outline. The new set start pointer operator defines the start point for cyclic strokes. There is also a new offset parameter in reproject operator for surface mode. Alright, hold up. I have to take a moment for a small tangent. I don't know what it is with 3.4, but for some reason when it comes to Blender 3.4, there's this hobo with a wrench that keeps showing up. I don't know about you, but I prefer my hobo with a shotgun.
Maybe you'll end up like me. A hobo with a shotgun.
An auto-masking feature is now available that allows for a convenient popover to easily manage all of your auto-masking options. This is an example of a mask from the cavity operator that allows for fine detailing. The auto-masking settings in sculpt mode are now accessible from the header in the 3D viewport. New methods have been added for automatically masking by cavity, viewpoint, and area. Rather than creating a cavity mask manually, the new auto mask option gives you a faster method of sculpting and painting using cavity. If you use the Create Mask button to convert the auto mask into a regular mask attribute. This allows you to visualize it and continue to edit it to your liking. These properties automatically mask geometry based on the geometric features of the mesh itself and are a quick alternative to frequent manual masking. The masks are initialized on every new stroke or tool usage and are never visible as an overlay. These properties are applied across all scope brushes and can be accessed via pie menus by pressing Alt-A. Alternatively, the properties can be configured on a per brush basis within the advanced brush settings. You have the ability to combine all automasking modes, which allows for more granular control. For example, it is possible to automask a specific face set while also excluding disconnected topology and face set boundaries, and only affect faces that are oriented toward the view via the View Normal option. As you may have guessed, cavity inverted is the same as cavity, but inverted, meaning that the valleys/crevices of the surface curvature will not be affected. It cannot be used at the same time as cavity and shares all of its settings. This feature is useful in cases when you need to quickly invert the cavity automask. Factor is the overall contrast of how strong the cavity is applied. 0.5 is the default value, but the value can be adjusted and used in conjunction with other features for fine-tuning. Blur is the number of times the cavity mask is blurred. A value of 0 results in a pure cavity automask, while anything above 6 will be less visible and negatively affect performance. This value has a cap of 10 unless you type manually, which allows for up to 25. You also have the ability to create custom curves to fine-tune the automask. An example where this would be quite useful is if only small crevices or flat surfaces should be affected, or if the contrast should be decreased or increased in a specific way. There are also various performance improvements. You now have faster reprojecting attributes using the voxel remesher. This parallelizes reprojection of face sets, paint mask, and vertex paint, among other things, which effectively cuts the profiling of remeshing a 3.4 million poly mesh in half. There are also performance improvements when face sets and masking are not in use. Previously, these data layers were stored and their values were used for computations, which affected performance even though the features weren't being utilized. Now these resources can be freed up, and this also frees up memory usage. Weight and vertex painting will use the whole modifier stack if it produces no topology changes. This just narrows down what needs to be called in order to achieve the same result, which saves space data. Face sets are now opt-in, meaning that primitive objects do not have the face set attribute by default. Specifically, the default cube shouldn't have face sets, and should be created as needed or optionally stored at the user's discretion, which could increase performance when dealing with the default cube mesh. Geometry nodes have a new evaluation system with a focus on providing better performance, especially when dealing with more complex node setups, and the new viewer node is a huge time saver by allowing you to quickly view what you're working on by selecting the node in the viewer. Any geometry connected can be visualized in the viewport, and its attribute values can be read in the spreadsheet. There are also new options for activation and deactivation that make it more streamlined. Using a hotkey on any node or socket connects it to the viewer and makes it active, and using the same shortcut on the empty space in the node editor deactivates the active viewer. Within the viewport itself, the Show Viewer option can turn off the viewer node visualization completely, in order to see the final output of the object's evaluation instead. When a viewer has a geometry and a separate value input connected, the values can be visualized with viewport overlays. When possible, the attribute domain used to visualize the data is determined automatically. Otherwise, the viewer node falls back to the face corner domain on the meshes and the point domain on curves. When necessary, the domain can be chosen manually. The attribute overlay opacity can be controlled with the viewer node setting and the overlays popover. The spreadsheet now only shows the viewer column for the domain that is selected in the viewer node. There's also new options when it comes to pinning. It can be helpful to pin a specific viewer node in the spreadsheet. When pinned, the spreadsheet still references the viewer node even when it becomes inactive. Geometry will be displayed in the spreadsheet, and the value is the field to be evaluated on the geometry. The type for this value is chosen automatically when the keyboard shortcut to link an output is pressed, but if you need manual adjustment, this is available in the node editor sidebar. In addition, there's a new distribution of points and volume nodes that allows you to create points within volume grids. There's also a new soft object node, so you can retrieve modifiers for the current object, a sample index, nearest, and a near-surface node to retrieve additional data for use. Face-set boundaries are a new node for mesh topology, which locates the edges in between groups of faces and additional access to mesh topology using these nodes. There is also a topology implementation and curves department, and the intensity of the overlay can be adjusted from the overlay popover in the 3D viewport header. Path tracing has received an update with the addition of Intel's Open Path Guiding Library being added to cycles. They term this path guiding rather than path tracing because it operates a little differently. This adds support for path guiding in CPU to help improve in scenes where finding a path to the light is difficult for regular path tracing. The purpose of path tracing is to reduce the noise in your scene, especially in particularly complex lighting setups. Bounce lighting and caustics are highly complex and difficult to render, so path tracing helps significantly when dealing with these specific elements. Not only does this increase the visual fidelity of your scenes, but it also decreases the need for samples, which speeds up render time. One example that Blender gave that path guiding would be particularly useful in is when a room is lit by lighting coming through a small space. Guiding is supported for surfaces with diffuse BSDFs and volumes with isotropic and anisotropic scattering. BSDF stands for Bidirectional Scattering Distribution Function. The function relates to the intensity of an incoming ray to an outgoing ray for all angles of incidence and reflection/transmission. The jargon overload was pretty intense when I looked into this, but in less technical terms, this allows the engine to more realistically simulate how light would interact with complex lighting in the real world. For example, how light would react and reflect off of and through water. This is known as caustics. Here's an example from a video Corridor crew did about this, called The Hardest Visual Effect to Make. Go check it out if you want to learn about this more in depth. It's worth noting that the path guiding definitely helps in this regard, but is not designed to be a caustic solver, so it might not help when attempting to render scenes with complex caustics. During rendering, path guiding is able to identify an approximation for light distribution in a given scene for both direct and indirect lighting. Then it uses this information to guide paths into directions that it wouldn't otherwise be able to explore using the standard process. Currently, path guiding is only available for CPU rendering and can be enabled in the Render Properties panel under Sampling, Path Guiding. Other features related to this are improved sampling for both Sobel and multi-jitter sampling. It's nice to have both these options because they can both potentially be a better option depending on the use case. New graphic driver fixes have also been added. Improvements to attribute nodes, including access to geometry nodes, instance attributes, and a new mode for accessing attributes of the current view layer, scene, or world are also available. An improvement added to baking is the option to bake specular effects from the active camera view instead of the above surface, which can be useful when baking textures that will be viewed from a fixed position or with limited camera motion. The NLA Track Editor now has auto-naming and the ability to draw tracks based on their extrapolation type, and users also have access to a redo panel. Performance improvements have been added specifically when subdividing loose edges with the Subdivision Modifier. A new Relax brush has been added which is geometry based and allows the UVs to follow the geometry more accurately to improve the overall quality of the UV mapping. This is available under the brush settings. And with this being a brush, the user has control over the process. UV packing now has non-manifold geometry that can be used to align UVs to rotation, use non-uniform grids, and randomize islands. The improvements in the UV editor grid are the aforementioned non-uniform grids and pixel spacing, which is part of a wider set of changes to implement grid and pixel snapping in the UV editor. This particular change adds a new third option called pixel grid to the previous grid options, which are dynamic grid and fixed grid. In addition, the draw grid on top of image allows you to see the grid and image at the same time within the UV editor, which was previously restricted to one or the other. The Align Rotation feature allows you to rotate UVs to follow the geometry orientation in the 3D viewport, align to the selected edge, or automatically guess the best orientation. Randomize Islands allows you to quickly set random values to the scale, rotation, or offset of selected UV islands. Other notable UV features are the ability for live unwrap when using the grab tool, improved sculpting with boundary support using the Laplacian method, and pinch support to relax UV tool for all modes and pinch UV tool. Constraint to bound support for UV relax, grab, pinch, and rotation operator is available, as well as the ability to disable winding when calculating islands to prevent orphaned islands. 3 margin scaling methods are now available as well: add, scaled, and fraction. Add is a simple method. You just add the margin. Scaled allows the use of scale of existing UVs to multiply margin. And fraction is a new slow method to precisely specify a fraction of the UV unit square for margin. Some of the core highlights are: there's a quicker thumbnail previewing for WebP images, metaballs are now evaluated as meshes, font thumbnails and font loading has been improved, performance has been greatly improved for U-layer sync operations for scripts that create a large amount of objects using a single operation. The object importer now has a global scaling option as well. Respect UV selection in Spherical Project, Cylindrical Project, Cube Project, and Smart UV Project. You also have a fix for UV island calculation with hidden faces. There was a fix applied in UV island calculation when in edge selection mode, and more options for UV select similar operator, face area, and area UV. And there was a fix for UV unwrap with degenerate triangle. All that's left to cover at this point are the updated and new nodes. I'm going to start with the new mesh nodes. The new face at boundaries node finds the edges between different patches of faces. Corners of face retrieves corners that make up a face, and corners of vertex retrieves face corners connected to vertices. Edges of corner retrieves the edges on both sides of a face corner, while edges of vertex retrieve the edges connected to each vertex. Face of corner retrieves the face each face corner is part of, and offset corner in face retrieves neighboring corners within a face. Vertex of corner retrieves the vertex each face corner is attached to, and curve of point retrieves the curve a control point is part of. Points of curve retrieves a point index within a curve. The set normal curve allows choosing the normal evaluation mode for curves. The sample curve node now has inputs for the curve index and a custom value to sample. The new general nodes are self object, which the sample curve node now has inputs for the curve index and a custom value to sample. Sample index retrieves data from specific geometry elements by index. Sample nearest retrieves the indices from the closest geometry elements. Sample nearest surface interpolates a field input to the closest location on a mesh surface. Distribute point and volume creates points inside of volume grids. And then there's the geometry nodes. All node group assets are now available in search menus for easy access. The Trim Curves node now supports cyclic curve node links and has been tweaked to make them fit better. Input sockets are reused when creating new node groups, and there's a duplicate link operator and user preference option for node tree data duplication. Node groups can now be duplicated with the shortcut Alt+D. You can now trim curves 3 to 4 times faster, and attributes of instances are now accessible for materials through the attribute node, and there's a new faster evaluation system. And last but not least, there's a driver update. In the Drive Properties panel, you now have the ability to mute selected drivers. And that's everything. So that was a pretty exhaustive coverage of everything that's new in Blender 3.4. There are some changes to Python, but I'm not familiar with Python. So there may have been a couple of other little things that I missed. So if you want to go ahead and check out the documentation for yourself, it's in the description. And if you made it this far, if you could please like the video and subscribe, that really helps out small channels like mine. Thanks for watching. This is Tech Art Academy signing off. Have a great day and stay edumacated.